Recognizing the House Leader of the Third Party and the member from Saanich North and the Islands.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I rise on behalf of the Third Party as the designated Speaker to provide my response to the speech from the throne. I first wish to acknowledge that this legislature sits on the territory of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, now known as the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. I also wish to acknowledge the Wasanich people. As MLA for Saanich North and the Islands, I am grateful to live and work on their territory. I wish to acknowledge and thank the many First Nations I've had the privilege to work with over the past 2.5 decades, among them Hwayet First Nations, Cowichan Tribes, and Tsawwassen First Nation. I hold up my hands to former Hwayet Chief Councillor Robert Dennis, current Chief Councillor of Hwayet John Jack, former Cowichan Chief Councillor Lydia Huitsum, and former Tsawwassen Chief Councillor Kim Baird. The Hwayet honored me with the traditional name Nososhluk, which means always watching in New Chalmeth. It is a name I carry with pride and deep respect for the responsibility it carries. I also want to take a moment to thank the many people who brought me to this moment. Thank you to my nearly 58,000 constituents in Saanich North and the Islands. Whether you voted for me or not, I am deeply humbled to represent you in this powerful place and promise to be a fierce advocate for you. We know British Columbia is the best place to live in the world, but I would be remiss for not mentioning that the best place to live in British Columbia is Saanich North and the Islands. Thank you to my amazing staff in the constituency office, at the caucus for your principled and tireless dedication to serving this province. Thank you to my mentors, retired Green MLAs Sonia Furstenau and Adam Olson. I stand on the shoulders of all the work you accomplished and hope to continue your legacy as principled legislators, truth-tellers, and tireless advocates for the voices that are often ignored. To my fellow MLAs, I honor your commitment to the people of British Columbia and to the work we will do together. Finally, to my partner for life, Inga, and my family, thank you for supporting me on this new journey. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. Honourable Speaker, as I, along with all MLAs, embark on the important work of this House, I am reminded of the powerful words of Esquimalt elder Mary Ann Thomas when opening the House earlier this February. And I quote, "You gave up your life to a special home here, where we can do our decisions, where we can work together, how we can love and help and forgive one another. In this room, there's no time for any judgment, any anger, because all that is poison." End of quote. As I begin my work in this House, I remind myself of the lesson I have learned on the journey to this day. To succeed in our work together, we need to have the courage to take the road less traveled, a willingness to take risks and make fiscally responsible investments in innovation and creative solutions, to ground all of our actions in community consultation, to never take no for an answer, and to be guided by the wisdom of our elders. Honourable Speaker, we live in perilous times, where there is the impact of accelerating climate change on our environment, the continuing cost of living crisis, lack of affordable housing, lack of timely access to health care, especially for our most vulnerable, the halting progress on Indigenous reconciliation, or the threat of a trade war and annexation from south of the border. British Columbians are tired of talk and no action. The threat of climate change is no longer theoretical. Entire countries are starting to disappear as ocean levels rise. Entire communities have been razed by wildfires. Families have been wiped out by landslides following fierce winter storms. 2024 was the warmest year on record, with a global average temperature of 1.55 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels. As these temperature increases continue to march towards the 2 degrees centigrade critical threshold and beyond, one can only imagine the devastating climate disasters we'll face on an annual basis if we do not take decisive action now. Despite these dire conditions, this government's Clean BC response has been insufficient and ineffective in reducing our emissions. The roadmap to 2030 is mostly aspirational. In the most recent 2023 Climate Change Accountability Report, very little substantive progress is reported. Emissions continue to rise. Moreover, Clean BC has emitted the two most important greenhouse gas sources in British Columbia: natural gas exports and wildfires. We're also moving away from putting people first. Despite living in the 9th wealthiest country by net worth, with the strongest economy in Canada, 1 out of every 4 British Columbians are living paycheck to paycheck, and 10% of our population is living below the poverty line. After 50 years of unparalleled economic growth, children are going hungry. We rely on school breakfast programs organized by NGOs to ensure that vulnerable children can learn after nourishing breakfast. Almost 150,000 children, that's 1 in 6 children in this province, are living in low-income households. The government is dragging out full implementation of the Declaration of Indigenous Rights Act rather than embracing reconciliation as a priority and a key contributor to a bright future BC. As my colleague from West Vancouver, Sea to Sky, pointed out in his response to the speech from the throne, members on both sides of the House of this chamber have made a habit of using phrases laser-focused when describing their tariff response. But a laser focus leaves too many crises in darkness. To tackle the overlapping challenges facing our province, including reconciliation, we need floodlights, not laser focus. We have only to look south of the border to see where a laser focus on industry leads, when politics is driven into a two-party system and good, hard-working people are abandoned by a neoliberal global trade economic system. Moreover, when the richest men in the world can dismantle foundational institutions and replace them with an economic oligarchy, to avoid the same fate, we must strive for greater equity, more representative democracy, and a broad government response that puts people and the environment first. Honourable Speaker, when we face the threat of an economic trade war, now is not the time to double down on status quo economic solutions, which hardly pay lip service to accelerating climate change, worsening living standards and services for the most vulnerable. Nor is this the time for lethargic action on reconciliation. Further solutions to the current economic threat that must not rely on the panacea of unlimited economic growth in a world of finite resources. That's no solution at all. Too often in the past 50 years, when faced with adversity, our leaders have relied on familiar short-term fixes. They've convinced us that the world is full of difficult trade-offs, so we should accept limited progress on the multiple challenges we face. We put off real progress on climate change and accept continued environmental degradation because we are told that's all we can afford. We delay full implementation of DRIPA and turn a blind eye to our society's most vulnerable, rationalizing that we are making some progress. And when we do make real progress, for example, the HIDA Act, it's not long before it's denounced, falsely I should add, as a threat to private property and freedom. Honourable Speaker, we need to build a 21st century economy that fosters innovation, creativity, knowledge and skills in each part of this province and in all key economic sectors. We need to build an economy that generates return for everyone, not just the top 1% and major corporations. And we need to do it now, not sometime over the next 50 years. We've been on the promise and never deliver plan for far too long. That must change now. We can build a 21st century economy that turns challenges into opportunities. Over the last few years in the province, we have seen floods and fires with disastrous consequences. Instead of reporting tragedies, we should be making headlines as a world leader on climate action and environmental protection. Let's build infrastructure to adapt to our current climate while investing in sustainable projects that make our future brighter. By investing in energy-efficient buildings, renewable energy projects, and efficient public transportation, we can support economic growth that is long-term and sustainable. BC's Green Building Centre employed over 20,000 people in 2020 alone with stable, full-time jobs. This work is not just good for our planet, it's good for us. It generates well-paid jobs that support families and protect our wealth. We need to continue the hard work of reconciliation. We've already seen how partnerships with First Nations in this province have generated economic wins for all British Columbians, Indigenous and non-Indigenous alike. BC is home to the second largest number of Indigenous entrepreneurs in Canada, with over 2,000 Indigenous-owned businesses across the province. Economic growth in Indigenous communities through entrepreneurship creates opportunities for innovation and independence. When I was a boy in Victoria, there were no tent cities or visible homelessness on our streets. Now, even middle-class families live in fear that one missed paycheck will force them to lose the roof over their heads. In a province as rich as ours, that is beyond shameful. Mr. Speaker, being world leaders in the fight against climate change, fully supporting those most vulnerable to unemployment and poverty, completing the hard work of reconciliation is not part of the problem. It is the solution. A zero-carbon economy in the future, and BC can be a spectator or an active, engaged participant. Protecting the environment of this special province will be our legacy to future generations. Eliminating unemployment and poverty will not only be a much more visible demonstration of dignity and compassion, it will reduce costly demands on our overstretched health and social support systems. Advancing Indigenous reconciliation will create the certainty needed for Indigenous people across BC to take their rightful place at the center of our future together. To make this transformation in times of adversity, we need the courage to take the road less traveled, a willingness to take risks and make fiscally responsible investments in innovation and creative solutions, to ground all of our actions in community consultation, to never take no for an answer, to be guided by the wisdom of our elders. Let me explain how I came to this realization. My father was a pilot in the Second World War. After serving overseas, he was posted in Ucluelet and at Pat Bay, where he flew Catalina amphibious aircraft out over the Pacific, searching for enemy submarines and other threats. After the war, my parents settled in Victoria. My dad became a lawyer at what was then Creason Company, and my mom worked as a social worker. Then, one morning when I was a toddler, my dad died. In an instant, at the age of 42, my mom became a single mother of 3, and her whole life was turned upside down. It was 1958, and many of my mom's friends and neighbors counseled her to take the life insurance money and be a stay-at-home mom. My mom disagreed. Instead, she made the decision to go to UBC Law School, become a lawyer, and carry on the legacy of my dad. In 1960, She met with the Dean of Law and asked to be admitted on the condition that if she failed at Christmas, she would leave. She was accepted and joined 2 other women law students. Against all the social norms and gender barriers of that era, she graduated with her law degree in 1964. When I was older, I realized that having the courage to take the road less traveled was part of my DNA. Mr. Speaker, I imagine every MLA in this House has a similar story, where in the face of adversity, they were courageous and pursued the road less traveled. We've faced adversity before. The COVID pandemic is a recent example. Yes, we looked to internal resources first. However, when necessary, we ran deficits. That was the fiscally responsible approach. Some say we must reduce taxes and balance budgets at all costs. Some will say we cannot afford to make the investments necessary to transform our economy. It's unfortunate, but people will remain mired in poverty, they say. The climate fight needs to be put on hold, and Indigenous people must accept being second-class citizens in one of the wealthiest jurisdictions in the world. I say no. In times of adversity, we cannot afford not to borrow and invest in innovation and creative solutions. In my own career, I think back to the adversity I faced as financial comptroller for the TD Bank in BC in the 80s, when most of the world was in the midst of a deep recession. Like now, there was pressure to be fiscally responsible and cling to the life raft of old ways of delivering services. At TD, we ensured we were fiscally responsible, but that did not stop us from finding the resources to innovate, finding new ways to operate, and find creative solutions to the challenges of the day. The same is true today. Yes, we must be fiscally responsible, but we can't let that be an excuse to stop investing, innovating, and transforming our economy from one suited to the 1970s to one for the 21st century. Take forestry in this province as an example. For decades, BC has allowed decisions on how its forests are managed or how timber pricing works to be determined by the Americans. We have exported the financial returns from forestry to the USA, and our reward, the USA has demonstrated that they will apply tariffs no matter what. We must stop appeasing the United States and manage our forests on our own terms. Take the path less traveled, become world leaders in forest sector innovation and value added, while all the time respecting Indigenous rights and fully implementing the Old Growth Strategic Review. To succeed in the face of adversity, we must take risk, make fiscally responsible investments, and innovate in every sector of the economy in a way that enables us to fight climate change and preserve the environment, end poverty for once and for all, and ensure every British Columbian has the health care and housing we expect and deserve. Celebrate Indigenous sovereignty. Don't fight it, celebrate it, and rely minimally on U.S. markets. Our job as government is to create the financial, regulatory, and policy environment to support this private sector innovation. I am not alone. I am not alone in this assessment. Dan Bresnitz, the Monk Chair of Innovation Studies at the University of Toronto, summed up the benefits of innovation in the fall of 2024 in a series of articles in the Globe and Mail. His observations apply to all of Canada, but are equally applicable to BC. And this is what he had to say. Our highly educated workforce, if it can be matched with an export-oriented, highly productive and innovative business sector that is leading the world in engaging in knowledge and investing in the newest equipment and technology, should be the best foundation for sustained prosperity. The foundation so that we have no poverty, that we fight climate change, that we deal with all of the things that I've just mentioned. However, he goes on to say, however, at least as importantly, such a vision is as far away as one can think from the vision the United States, Silicon Valley, and Wall Street celebrate, a vision in which only a tiny sliver of the society, the geek elite, their financiers, and their celebrity chefs enjoy both good, challenging jobs and immense riches. Clearly, Honourable Speaker, if there is any silver lining to the threats of tariffs and a trade war with the USA, it is forcing us to do something we should have done 25 years ago: invest in the heavy lifting to create a 21st century economy. With tariff threats changing by the day and economic instability shaking every part of our society, I know this government is feeling pressure to act quickly, but that cannot be an excuse for cutting corners. When NDP Attorney General Colin Gableman asked me to lead the team that developed BC's first Freedom of Information Act in 1991, I was told to move fast, but ensure everybody inside and outside government was fully consulted. The election had been in mid-October, and at the time, Premier Harcourt wanted this FOI bill to be one of the first introduced in the following spring session. So, about now. We viewed consultation as an advantage, not an inconvenience, and we built the legislation from the ground up with broad consultation. The Premier wanted to create the best FOI legislation in Canada, and community engagement was a key to success. That public engagement did two things. It created better legislation, and it built political will, all while meeting our deadline. After the bill was introduced, we did another round of consultation. We listened. We didn't disregard a suggestion because it came from another party or a particular stakeholder. Nobody has a monopoly on great ideas. We let reason and science, not anecdotes and made-up facts, guide the legislative process. In fact, we made an unprecedented 36 amendments before final passage of the bill. Committee stage and everything was real, and there were amendments. Even then, everybody did not get what they wanted, but they appreciated the fact that they were heard, and the amendment process was real. When it passed, journalist Vaughn Palmer said, quote, "Experts agree that it was the best legislation of its kind in Canada." Rapid response is not an excuse to skirt consultation, nor to avoid working with stakeholders to build solutions from the ground up. I learned through my experience with freedom of information legislation that if you want legislation to endure, you have to do the work, you have to build consensus, you have to be inclusive. You have to work across ministries. You have to reach beyond your usual networks and nurture new relationships to create real positive change. Hwayet First Nations is an inspiration for all of the work I do. Hwayet exemplifies one of many Indigenous nations in BC who have successfully traveled the path from nearly being wiped out and having their children, culture, economy, fisheries, landholding, everything about them almost erased to become and now they've become a modern nation with a bright future. Like nearly all other First Nations, Hwayet lost 90% of its population following contact. Imagine if you walked through your neighborhood today and 9 out of every 10 friends and neighbors and family were lost. If we had more time, I would welcome an opportunity to share Hwayet's remarkable, courageous, don't take no for an answer history of the past 40 years with you. For today, I wish to share 3 sacred principles that I believe are central to the success of Hwayet and which have guided our work together over many years. First, Hishuk Masawak. Everything is one. Everything is connected. People, air, water, lands, forests, fishery, everything. In a governing context, we must not operate in silos, and we must take everything into account. Second sacred principle, uathlak, taking care of everyone. In a governing context, we must always support and take care of everyone and everything, no matter the circumstances. Nobody can be left out. That is what humanity demands. And finally, ESOC, conducting yourself with utmost respect. In a governing context, we must treat each other with utmost respect. As we work together in these perilous times, I urge every MLA in this House to reflect on the wisdom of these three sacred principles and consider applying them to your work in the House on behalf of your constituents and British Columbians across the province. That's what British Columbians expect. With the foundation of that understanding, I'll now respond directly to the speech from the throne. At a time when we must apply 21st century thinking to the perfect storm we're facing, this government is pulling us back. At a time that calls for courage and big ideas, this spring's speech from the throne was narrow-minded and incremental, repeating old announcements and tired policies. This government is falling back, so far, on resource extraction and raw exports. We need the courage to innovate, invest in value-added industry, and diversify our markets and economy. We can revitalize old but viable sectors like forestry while investing in emerging sectors like clean tech and sustainable tourism. The throne speech offers only incremental implementation of the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, when that work is foundational to our shared prosperous future. The throne suite puts the environment in a silo, often ignored, unless it's an obstacle on the path to fossil fuel expansion. Instead, we should be protecting and investing in the environment for the well-being and prosperity of future generations. In a throne speech filled with talk of tariffs, trade, industry, and the environment, there wasn't much mention of people. Where was the support of our most vulnerable? Those living paycheck to paycheck, those facing extreme challenges with housing, healthcare, and groceries, those struggling with addictions. It is shameful in one of the wealthiest jurisdictions that 10% of our population live below the poverty line. That's 500,000 people who deserve to live healthy, fulfilling lives, who want to contribute to BC instead of living in a constant state of uncertainty. If we lift our most vulnerable out of poverty, not only do we help individuals, we also help our overstretched healthcare and social programs. Now is not the time for incremental change. Now is the time to work together, to take bold, courageous action, to transform our society so the next generation has every opportunity to thrive. The Premier has leapt into action in response to this tariff threat, but tariffs are not the only threat to BC. The Accord, our Green Caucus negotiated with this government, the Confidence and Responsible Government Agreement, CARGA, tackles many of the challenges facing our province. It provides a roadmap for building resilience in our province, diversifying our economy, and achieving well-being for all. The Accord is not on the Never Never plan. CARGA lays out 2025 deliverables for both short-term progress and for long-term transformation. This year, we will be working with many ministries to lay the groundwork for systemic change. This is a collaborative relationship to deal with and address some of the critical issues we face. And so systemic change, performance analysis of BC's primary healthcare system to understand how we can create the best form of healthcare for different communities across BC. A complete overhaul of Clean BC when the impacts and costs of the climate emergency are inescapable and accelerating. Clean BC is a mere shadow of what it must become. A review of the Rental Protection Fund, a forest review and action plan to address concerns about sustainability, jobs, environmental protection, and the future of industry. Working together to strengthen our collaborative local processes around water management, a review of Social Security and disability rates, working together with the Pachidat and other key stakeholders to permanently protect Fairy Creek. And last but not least, an evaluation of policy and legislation recommendations for increasing democratic engagement, including considering methods of proportional representation. Let me stop here to emphasize the importance of further considering proportional representation. The 2018 referendum on proportional representation was destined to fail because the question was indecipherable. The Premier has even acknowledged that. The case in favor of proportional representation is still strong. Voters are able to vote for the party and platform they support, rather than being forced to vote strategically. Democracy is strengthened, and as a result, and polarization from a first-past-the-post system is ameliorated. Nobody wants a system that generates the swings we see in the United States. While systemic change begins in 2025, the Accord also includes immediate action to support British Columbians, funding for community health centres, investments in mental health bringing psychologist visits under MSP, 30,000 units of non-market housing, including 7,500 units in 2025, expanded access to SAFER and RAP, including increased eligibility and no more clawbacks, active support for local government housing models that provide wraparound services and reflect local conditions to tackle the overlapping crises of homelessness, toxic drugs, and disconnected communities. Frequent, reliable, and affordable regional transit on key interregional routes, and a focus on the Sea to Sky corridor in 2025. That's fundamental to tackling the climate crisis. Significant funding to provide heat pumps to low and moderate income households. Closing the property transfer tax loophole for the sale of properties by trust. This is our moment. There's so much we can accomplish within this Accord, and we know that working collaboratively, this government can do and achieve so much more in 2025. At the beginning of this speech, I spoke about the many mentors who've shaped my life and will inspire my work as MLA. Among them were MLAs Sonia Firstnow and Adam Olson, who left an incredible legacy in this building and an inspiring list of accomplishments. As I close my first speech in this House, I hope I am able to honor their legacy by contributing tangible benefits for my constituents as well as all British Columbians. To do that, we will all need to work together, having the courage to take the road less traveled, the willingness to take risks and make fiscally responsible investments in innovation and creative solutions, the strength to ground all of our actions in community consultation, the resolve to never take no for an answer, all the while being guided by the wisdom of our elders. Thank you, Honourable Speaker.